pleased to welcome you today. For those of you joining us online, welcome as well. We have a really exciting lineup for you today of amazing attorney professionals. Maybe you can close the door. Help me be quiet. Sorry, we had a little noise from the hallway. Attorney professionals who can talk to you about opportunities, careers, and clerkships in the U.S. intelligence agencies. We are also joined by special acquisition professionals to talk about non-attorney positions in these agencies as well. So throughout today's session, we're going to save time at the end for your questions, both online and also in the room. So if you have some questions, let's save them for the end for the panel. But more importantly, too, if you have them online, feel free to put them in the chat. The chat is being monitored by Professor Victoria Christoph, who I'm delighted is joining us in the front row, who is our visiting associate professor of law and also our government procurement fellow. She'll be moderating the chat to make sure that you guys are getting the questions asked that you need. So again, put it in the chat, or again, in the room, we'll save about 10-15 minutes at the end to answer your questions. All right, and then for those of you in the room, I hope you enjoy the waters that we are drinking today. Come on in. Oh, we haven't. Are they working? Do they look like they're on? Yeah, they look like they should be fine.
They should be fine.
Okay, all right. I found them.
Okay. What about that one?
That one should be fine. Thank you so much. Sorry, we're still working through some of the tech of a hybrid event. All right, so without further ado, let's get started on the substance of the panel. So tonight's topic is the focus is on careers and clerkships in the U.S. intelligence agencies. So we wanted to plan a program like this because there's often a mystique associated with the intelligence agencies and a lot of questions from people on the outside who wonder about how to get jobs there, the type of work that attorneys and non-attorneys do, and more in particular for our program, the government contracting opportunities, whether legal or not. So tonight's program will be focusing on that. So now I found some information, and for those of you that don't know, this wasn't Wikipedia, but the U.S. intelligence community is comprised of 18 agencies. We are fortunate to have 4 of them represented tonight, but there are more online. There's actually a really nice website, intelligence.gov, which outlines the agencies that are part of the IC or the intelligence community. We have 4 represented tonight: the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the Central Intelligence Agency, the National Reconnaissance Office, and the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency. Now, DoD has 9 intelligence components or elements as part under its umbrella. And then some of the other agencies have other elements as part of the IC community. So there's lots of opportunity, but today we'll specifically learn about 4 of those opportunities. So without further ado, I will introduce our panels. I'm not going to say their long bios because they're going to tell you their career paths themselves. But I'll start with Egan Donnarumma, who is the Associate General Counsel from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Welcome. Next is Ashley Powers, who's Assistant General Counsel from the Central Intelligence Agency. Third, we have Ken Sachs, who's Assistant General Counsel, Acquisition Law and Intellectual Property at the National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency. And most importantly, he's a GW Law alum. Sorry to do that to my non-alums on the panel. And then next to him is Brian Young, who's the Assistant General Counsel from the National Reconnaissance Office, who also, most importantly, is a GW Law alum, both in government procurement. So with that said, let's first tell people what you do. They might not be familiar with the work of your particular agency. So I'm sure everybody knows that Ashley's agency is a bunch of James Bond types running around in spy versus spy gear. But maybe you could tell us a little bit briefly about what the CIA does.
Sure. So the mission of the CIA is to collect foreign intelligence, to analyze that intelligence, and to provide that analysis to the President, the National Security Council, and other policy makers to help inform their policy decisions when it comes to national security. The agency also conducts covert action as directed by the President.
Okay, thank you for that. Egan, do you want to tell us a little bit about ODNI?
Sure. So ODNI was a product of a number of reforms that came after September 11th. And its principal responsibility is to set policy and budget on behalf of the entire intelligence community. So it is like kind of sits on top of the other 17 intelligence agencies and sets policy.
Ken?
National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency, which is mouthful, we would just say NGA. It's probably one of the least known organizations in the IC. We started out doing maps and grew from there, where we provide human geography maps and imagery intelligence to national policymakers, as well as provide support to humanitarian and disaster relief. One of the big things that we just finished up was support to Hurricane Ian down in Florida. So we provide that information and intelligence to whomever needs it, usually at the president and below.
Thank you, Ken. And before I go to Brian, this is what I'm going to say to my panelists. Please use your outside voices. So our natural state in teaching is to talk at this type of volume. So I'm going to ask you to kind of speak more loudly than you're probably used to or comfortable with, just because, again, we got the folks online. And if necessary, we can give you a floating mic. All right, Brian, so now in your shoutiest voice, I'm just kidding.
I'll give that a try. I work with the National Reconnaissance Office, and just like Ken calls his NGA, most people refer to us as the NRO. I'm biased, but we are a cool agency with a pretty cool mission. We research and develop, we acquire, we launch, and we maintain overhead systems, satellites, and furtherance of intelligence collection needs to meet those needs of the nation, the Department of Defense, and foreign and international partners. The NRO is a little bit unique. It was formed in 1961 as a classified organization for those overhead system needs, and is an amalgam of the Central Intelligence Agency. We have DoD civilians, we have military personnel. And the NRO is both a member of the Department of Defense, a defense agency, and also a member of the intelligence community. So both ODNI and the Secretary of Defense's office exercise joint oversight over the NRO.
All right, so we'll go back in reverse. So I'm going to stick with you, Brian. What type of work do you do as a government contracts attorney at your agency?
Okay, so yeah, this is like an office-based question. So what do you do here? For anyone who's worked in the government contracting space, at the heart of it, government contracting is government contracting, I think, wherever you go. It's been that way for me in the different assignments and jobs that I've had. But primarily for me, we have different divisions within the NRO. My primary support is to our communications systems directorate. So kind of all things IT related, I primarily support. I've bid protest experience, so when bid protests and things like that come up, I support that. I work on things that relate directly to our mission in terms of research and development relating to overhead systems. But really anything you can think of that's government contracting is something that we touch in the NRO, and maybe more so for all of the attorneys who work at the NRO than maybe the other folks on the panel, because based on the mission of our agency, it's an acquisition-centric organization. So we need people who are very deep in acquisition experience, but then even just regular attorneys who have different portfolios, it's very helpful for them to have some acquisition experience.
So we're going to put a pin in the bid protest, because a lot of our students have a class on bid protest and have certainly learned about bid protests in their formation class. For those of you taking it right now, and try to learn a little bit more about what a bid protest looks like in an intelligence agency. So I imagine somewhat different than it would be at, I don't know, maybe the EPA or a non-intelligence agency. All right, Ken.
You asked me to talk in my outside voice. I will do that. I was in the Air Force, so did a lot of trial work before I came in to NGA about 6 years ago. I support mostly our divisions are also set up with different responsibilities within contracting. And two of our senior contracting officers are here, the head of the contracting agency, as well as her deputy. My primary responsibility is software development. I support the software and algorithm development within NGA. So there's a lot of issues, it's on all three of our classified systems, the unclassified, the secret system, and the top secret system. So there's a lot of issues involving software rights, IP, data rights. And so mostly my job is to help with acquisition planning, really cradle to grave. Kind of think of it as your formations class all the way through to the end of contract performance. Every issue, just like Brian said, we get involved in, from bid protests to contract disputes to disputes that go to court. So we're involved in all of those areas. I also provide a lot of advice on ethics. For those of you who are familiar with government ethics, those are very complicated rules, especially when you're dealing with financial conflicts of interest. And so those are issues that I deal with on almost a weekly basis with my source selections.
So for those of you that didn't get into Professor Bell's intellectual property government contracts class in the fall, we are offering it again in the spring. If this is of interest to you, there's an opportunity to learn more. All right, Egan?
Sure, yeah, so government contracting at ODNI is a little unique. So just for context, it is a very small agency that primarily does oversight functions on behalf of the IC. So most of our day-to-day contracts are actually through assisted acquisitions from other agencies. We do have a small contracting shop that deals with simplified acquisitions and other types of purchase orders, as well as some research contracts for a research organization called IARPA that is within ODNI. But what's a little unique about ODNI is that oversight function. So just a couple of the areas that we get involved in. One is oversight of major system acquisitions. And so we're kind of, we coordinate with Department of Defense often to oversee major system acquisitions, which are there are certain thresholds. And that involves ensuring the cost, schedule, technical capability development are being implemented as planned, and then we help kind of facilitate integration if there are multiple agencies involved. Another somewhat unique aspect to ODNI, so the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, has authority to designate what are called services of common concern, which essentially is a recognition that if there are common services that are used across IC agencies, the DNI can actually designate one of those agencies to be that service provider. So for example, like commercial cloud services, instead of having every agency procuring its own commercial cloud services, the DNI can designate one agency to procure those services on behalf of the intelligence community. And so where I sit, one of my main clients is the IC Chief Information Officer, who oversees a lot of these IT SOCs, as we call them, services of common concern. And so we work through establishing them and doing a lot of administration. And then lastly, there's always kind of the miscellaneous contracts related type issues that come up with being kind of in this in-house counsel role. So we receive a lot of appropriations questions, government contractor relations type questions, kind of on the ethics piece. Everyone wants to buy food. The answer is almost always no, but that's just, yeah. So that's kind of the breadth of what we deal with.
So at the CIA, going back to what Ken was saying about the cradle to grave government contract representation, that's really what we do. We help with acquisition strategy. Sorry to be louder because I realize I'm probably not projecting as much. And then through solicitation drafting, requirements development, through source selection evaluation, award, and then through contract administration. Like my colleagues have said, we also represent the agency when there is government contract related litigation. So whether that's bid protests or contract claims. We also provide guidance and counsel on procurement related statutes and regulations. So and compliance with those statutes. So for example, one of the things that I've spent quite a bit of my time over the past couple of years working on is something called Section 889, It is, for those who aren't familiar, it is a statute that prohibits the government from buying or entering into contract with companies that buy or use certain types of services or goods from certain Chinese companies. So helping the government put into place a compliance program to make sure that we are not running afoul of the law. And then we also provide advice and counsel on prospective legislation that is procurement related. So the IC can sometimes have unique interests in certain legislation that's going to get passed. And so we want to make sure that our equities are being protected. Like I said, a lot of what I do is compliance related. I also work quite a bit on the agency's mission to start fostering continue fostering relationships with emerging technology companies. And so I will put a plug for the professor's intellectual property class. Data rights is a very important issue. I think it's important, frankly, not only for CIA, I think everyone here would probably agree, and even outside of the IC agencies, I think it's just, as technology evolves, it is a lot of what all government agencies are buying, and data rights is the meat of that. And so it's a very important issue that not everyone is always as well versed as they need to be. So take that class.
So with the exception of Ken, we do have a bit of a soft-spoken panel. I had Ken in class, so I know how wonderful that voice is. I'm going to ask you when you guys answer just to hold the mic actually right in front of your body, just because our online folks are having a hard time hearing. And I will also kick a door to stress my point. So do that, please.
I can just want to say one thing on, you'll hear the word equity, equities. That's a term the IC uses that I'd never heard before I got here. That just simply means interests. So if you hear the word equity, that's what we refer to as interests. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop, Ashley, but
Yeah,
with the
no,
students
that's
not
fair.
knowing necessarily what that means.
Yes.
Without a mic, that was well done. I heard you. Okay, so we're going to go from here to turning into how you kind of fell into this. So I always call this the government contracts origin story, because everyone has one. Some people come from the military or have a family that are from the military. We know that our JAGs in particular we have some here tonight, tend to come this route. Or maybe you had a government contractor in your family, but that's not most people. Most people tend to kind of fall into government contracting. At our school, we have students, we have JDs getting their Juris Doctor that are going to be potentially concentrating government contracts. We have attorneys that have come back to school here for their advanced graduate master's degree, their LLM, and we also have non-attorneys here for their MSLs. So these are acquisition professionals that are here too. So everyone that's in this room mostly is somebody who already knows that this is kind of what they want to do. But I'm guessing that maybe that's not the case with the panelists on this table, but I could be wrong. So Ashley, let's start with you. What's your origin story and your career path to how to get to where you are?
Sure. So I will confess, I did not choose government contracts intentionally, but sort of fell into it. When I came out of law school, I knew two things. I wanted to do litigation and I wanted to work for the government. So I went the clerkship path. And I started in a state court in Maryland and then went to the Southern District of New York. I wanted to move back to DC and get into government. And so I went into the black hole of USA jobs and applied to basically any job that seemed like it would have some sort of litigation component and seemed interesting. I applied to many jobs, one of which was at the Department of Commerce in their contract law division. And that's where I got a job. And I spent 4 years there and it was great. That's where I cut my teeth. But I will say that I was such a government contracts neophyte that on my first day, I referred to it as the FAR and was quickly corrected. I then wanted to move back to Chicago for personal reasons. And once you get outside of the Beltway, there's not a huge
government contracts focus in other legal markets. So when I was in Chicago, I clerked again, and then went to a law firm where I split my time between more traditional commercial litigation and a little bit of government contracts. But at the same time, unbeknownst to them, I was waiting for my clearance at the agency to get passed. And so after about 2 years at the law firm, I went back to the CIA and joined the contract law division and have been there ever since.
That's good. Egan, your
Great.
origin story.
Sure. So mine started, I guess, as a 2L. In law school, I had the opportunity to intern at the NSA, Office of General Counsel, not doing contracts, but in the intelligence law office, and then got hired on full time and right after graduation. And when I started, I was assigned to the Acquisitions Research and Technology Group is what they called it, but basically NSA OGC's contracts office. And so I worked there for a number of years doing, that's a lot of traditional contract issues, and then eventually moved over to the operations side of NSA's of OGC, where I was advising on NSA's intelligence activities. But even there, we kind of move around to support different organizations. I found myself supporting in one area for a number of years that required a lot of industry engagement. And so I still was drawing on my transactional and contract experience, even though I wasn't technically in the contracts group. And then in just this past April, I moved over to ODNI and kind of like I spoke about before, it's kind of contracting tangential. Yeah, so that's kind of where I got to where I am.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm glad though that you've mentioned the fact that you do kind of policy and oversight. One of the themes of our programming so far this semester is that government contracts is basically everything. So, while tonight we're focusing on government contracts in intelligence agencies, we've talked about government contracts in environmental, we've had programming related to fraud and corruption. We know that it can do with labor and employment, transactional litigation, compliance. It's so many different things. So that just highlights the diversity, even within the government space, how different the government procurement jobs can be depending on where you're working at that moment.
Yeah, I don't know if this is one of those cases of like, if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail, but even moving around a lot of different offices within NSA and then ODNI, somehow contract issues just appear. And like, it's always like having that skill set has just, I don't know, I found it, I've continued to apply it even in different positions. Can't escape it.
Ken.
Ken, you don't use this.
No. I started as an Air Force judge advocate right out of law school. I went to Washington University in St. Louis, doing what all JAGs do when they first start out, criminal law. I got assigned to an overseas base in Japan and was looking for a temporary duty to come back to the States with a free trip. And they're like, hey, do you want to go to the 2-week Army contract law course? I'm like, okay, it's a free trip back to the US. And from there, the rest of my career got set. Because once you learn government contracts within the military, they don't let you go because there's not as many people with experience in government contracts. So I deployed twice doing government contracts. I did contract litigation for the Air Force before the Armed Services Board of Contract Appeals. Then my final assignment, I was at a major command doing the acquisition for all of the systems at that command, and then came over to NGA. So kind of fell into the position doing government contracts and have liked it ever since. As Dean Teltman said, I just finished the LLM, graduated in September. And the only reason it was September is because I needed the summer to finish my thesis. So foot stomp any of you working on your thesis, I know what you're going through. And after that, it's just been learning about government contracts and trying to apply that to the best of my ability. Thanks.
Brian.
It's hard to follow Ken here because I am not a loud talker like Ken. But I'll try. And when you say origin story, I haven't heard that before. That's really hard to live up to. I was not bitten by a spider. But what's pretty neat, I think, is everybody here has different experiences. So for me, I knew when I was in college, I wanted to be an IP lawyer. So that was kind of my main focus in law school. And then I worked at an intellectual property law firm for about 4.5 years after law school. And what I didn't know then, because I was really young, doing the same thing every day, which means you're an expert at what you're doing. I didn't realize that, but it wasn't super fulfilling. I was working for companies. I didn't feel like I was really adding any value. So I also became a judge advocate in the Air Force, just not right out of law school. Did the types of assignments you would expect a judge advocate would do. My portfolio was mainly military justice, and I was an area defense counsel. And I was preparing to separate from the Air Force, and instead they said, "You want to get an LLM?" And all I knew about government contracting was that, kind of in my mind, from my private sector experience, it was fake. So like I just heard, the government can give direction to contractors, and the contractors have to. It's not a contract. That was foreign to me. But anyway, I said, "Sure, I'll do the LLM program. Go to GW. That sounds fantastic." So I did that. Learned a lot because the programs here, as you guys know, are amazing. And from there, I was stationed at Robins Air Force Base in Georgia, which at the time I wasn't super excited about, but in hindsight, I got to do a lot of base operational sustainment contracting, worked with a lot of small businesses, learned the real nuts and bolts of very low dollar acquisitions. And then from there, I worked in the General Counsel's office for the Air Force, and worked on very large procurements and very large and well publicized major weapon systems. And then eventually, my kids grew older, and so I separated from the Air Force and took a civilian position at the NRO, which is where I've been for the last few years.
So let's talk a little bit about substance, and then I want to talk about, I know we have anxious students and alumni who are interested in learning about opportunities in your organization. So I guess what surprised you the most about this practice once you kind of, for those of you who kind of left civilian positions and moved to the intelligence community, whether government contracts or not? Ashley, let's start with you.
So the bulk of my other government contracts experience prior to coming to the agency was at the Department of Commerce. And I'm not here to tell you that one agency's mission is more important than another, but I would say that the thing that surprised me most, but should not have, is how top of mind mission is at the agency and how much that permeates everything that you do. Now, to Dean Tiltman's point, I am not Jack Ryan, and I don't fancy myself Jack Ryan. I understand I'm a government contracts attorney, so my impact on the mission is what it is. But I think at the end of the day, the mission of the agency is to protect national security. And there are people at the agency who on a daily basis put their lives on the line to affect that mission. And that trickles down every layer at the agency. And so even when I am stuck in the minutia of whatever I'm doing, I will occasionally get a call from my client who has a particular contract or a particular issue that has a very critical role to the national security mission. And that will be a very good reminder for me about what I am doing and the role that I have to play in that mission. And so, but I think just that, not that the people at the Department of Commerce aren't also very dedicated to their mission, but it just carries a different weight and a different impact when you consider what the mission is and what people are sacrificing for that mission.
Sure. Yeah. So totally agree with everything you said. I guess the thing that surprised me most when I first started doing government contracting, straight out of law school, was the dollar figures that you're responsible for is just not what I expected. And also the fact that, me being kind of a very junior attorney is, the responsibility given over contracts kind of caught me off guard. But it kind of now transitioning from, big organization doing kind of big procurements to now doing policy work. The thing I've been adjusting to is just kind of the kind of analytical lens that you approach problems, where before it was very much, okay, this is this is NSA's mission, this is what it cares about, and I can help kind of drive that. And now my lens has shifted to more thinking about, okay, as we're developing a policy, how does that get implemented across all of the IC, which you have, big agencies like the ones here, and then, the Agile 13, we call them, of the other agencies as well. So that's been just kind of an interesting mind shift that I've been experiencing the last few months.
Ken?
What they said, obviously. One thing I found is that contracts is government contracts is government contracts. From my time in the Air Force to what I was doing now at NGA, the nuts and bolts of the day-to-day work of advising on source selections and acquisition planning and documentation of the source selection results and defending protests isn't really different. What is fundamentally different is the nature of the information you're dealing with. And what scares the heck out of me every day that I deal with this is realizing that most of the material I'm dealing with are at the top secret and above level, and making sure that that information gets protected. Because as Ashley said, there's a mission tied behind a lot of this information, and people's lives are online when or if this information is released. And so that does keep me up sometimes at night to make sure that that information stays on the systems that it needs to stay on, and that we're dealing with it. I mean, when I was in the Air Force, I never had a classified acquisition. Now in the NGA, I've got several, and they're in the $1 billion range. I mean, that idea that I'm advising on contract that can have $1 billion just is dumbfounding to me. But that's what the level of support that you provide, and it's the level of trust that my leaders have, and the advice that I'm giving to the two COs in front of me and to their subordinate COs. That's what's fascinating, is that right away you're thrown in and expected to give that kind of level of advice. But it's no man or woman is an island. We all work as a group. Within my office, we have 8 total government contracts attorneys. We talk to each other every day. There is, unlike a law school exam, nothing ever gets done by yourself. Everybody talks answers out. And I think that's one of the great things about government contracts, is that everyone's willing to talk to everyone else.
Right.
A couple of things. One, I did work on classified procurements when I was with the Air Force, and I've done a mixture in my current assignment. And I wouldn't get stuck on the dollar figures, because I think we all have worked on procurements, big and small. And sometimes the size does not necessarily lend itself to the complexity of the issues that you wind up dealing with. Some of the smaller procurements can actually be much more complicated than even some of the major weapon systems that we deal with. So I say that. The differences that I have noticed personally in the IC is probably the timeline or the rapidity from which you work on stuff to where you have an effect. So for judge advocates or folks who have experience in the DoD or as military lawyers, we work on things, and those things impact national security, but sometimes it will take a while. So, if you're working on a major weapon system procurement or an aircraft procurement, that has a long lead time. There are things that you work on in the IC that go to bang much faster. And so it's really rewarding to be a tiny cog in the support wheel that affects the mission. And that part is really cool. On the day-to-day, something that really surprised me is I could not in a million years have located where in the FAR organizational conflicts of interest was. And I never dealt with them until I was in the IC. And I found that they constantly come up in source selections and issues that we deal with. So wrapping my head around that has been a challenge that I did not really think I was going to need to worry much about.
Yeah, keeps a lot of people busy. So, all right, let me turn to what a lot of folks are interested in learning about, is how can we work for you, or how could they work for you? So let's start first with us. So instead of going down the road, I'm going to say this: how many of your agencies will hire students or have opportunities in your agencies like internships or summer honors programs or summer like clerkship programs that you offer for current students? So Brian's the odd one out. Okay. How many?
Speak to that when I get a chance.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, ignore Brian for a moment. So how many of you offer them during the school year? Or ODNI? So you think so? So
Yeah, yes,
unpaid
yes,
internships?
yes.
Okay.
I'm
And so
working on it.
you're working on, it. Okay,
Yeah.
well, we love school year interns. We have this huge field placement program here, so we love that. And then as far as the program, so I'm assuming, do we still have positions open for this upcoming summer? Okay, so 2 out of 4, we still have opportunities. So during the networking component, you should ask them because there could be opportunities for those of you that are current students looking for summer opportunities with their organizations. All right, what about immediately after graduation? If somebody is a 3L, do you ever have openings in your organizations for someone who's just graduating, let's say JD?
That's what we call our honors program. So
Okay.
that's what I was referring to.
Now, does it stem? Can you maybe tell how does the honors program work?
Sure. So at the agency, you're considered an honors attorney from the day you graduate until you're 3 years out. So you could apply as a 3L and you could go to a law firm, you could go to another agency, you could do a clerkship up until 3 years, and then you could still apply to be an honors attorney. And that after 3 years, that's when you go into the lateral attorney hire program.
Okay, the same?
No, we're different because we have to be. Our program is up to 3 years post law school, but you can't have worked in a law firm. It's for clerkships. So that we're looking for recent graduates right out of graduating in 3L. You have to get your bar license within 14 months of onboarding. And that's a whole nother conversation that we can have about what we mean by onboarding, because it's not like getting hired by a law firm. And so our program is limited to those who are coming out of clerkships or coming right out of law school itself and have not yet worked in the private industry. That's how we're fundamentally different from the CIA.
Ryan, do you want to speak to why you guys don't do anything?
Not to that, but we, the NRO participates and has an honors program. So for folks who are acquisition professionals, that's something that we can talk about either here or afterwards. In terms of the Office of General Counsel, we just don't participate in that primarily for staffing reasons. We don't have the vast number of attorneys that my friends here on the panel do. And so we wind up making do with a little bit less. We generally draw our attorneys from lateral hires, which is based partly on the complexity of our acquisition mission, partly on the size of our organization, and partly on experience. So we have no hard and set fast rules relative to attorneys. We would probably hire attorneys out of law school based on the circumstances, but just in the last several years, that has not been our experience. It's generally been lateral hires outside of usually government practice, military practice, or private practice.
And for yours, if you think you might do the school year or summer, how it typically would it be going on your website? How would typically?
Yeah, I mean, and so, it's sort of new to me as well, just being relatively new to ODNI, but I did look, there is a job posting on USA Jobs for the legal internship program. It's an unpaid internship. And I think, I don't know exactly how they fill it, but it seems to be running here. We had interns over the summer and we have some right now.
Okay, great. So some questions to ask after our panel discussion is over. So now I know we have some lateral attorneys. I can recognize some names online in particular. What is it like to transition from that? So if somebody's thinking, I'm at a firm, I've been at a, except for Ken's, honors program. I'm at a firm, I've been at a firm for 4 years, maybe 5 years, maybe it's 3 years. I'm thinking about making a transition from government contracts at a firm, or, what is that something that it sounds like Brian's agency definitely considers that. What do you recommend? Because I think that kind of dovetails into your clearance process. How does that work? I mean, you're applying, and then how does the clearance process work through that? Because it's such a lengthy process for your agencies. Maybe Ashley, you could walk through how you did that. I mean, you did it from another agency, but.
Yeah, well, I came directly from the law firm, but I actually applied while I was clerking. So, but the clearance process took a while. We are trying to work on that. But my advice would be forward looking. So don't don't start to think about applying when you think you want to leave within 2 months. That's not going to happen. Again, we're trying to get that timeline down, but it's still going to be, I would say, at least a 6-month process, if not a year. So if you're at a law firm and you're starting to think within the next year or so that you would want to leave, that is something we're certainly interested in. We, as I was saying earlier, we hire honors attorneys and we also hire laterals, but for government contracts, we are always interested in people who have substantive work experience, be it law firm or another agency or clerkships. We are also interested in getting students who are coming out of law school who have focused their studies on government contracts and hopefully have some work experience through internships or externships. But like Brian was saying, we have a complex portfolio and we don't apparently have, I don't know what the rumors are, we don't have droves of attorneys the way I wish. I think Morgan, my boss, wishes. But the agency, OGC at the agency is a little bit unique in that we work on a rotational model. So the attorneys are always rotating either within different divisions within main OGC or out to component legal positions. So we always have a need. We always need more acquisition attorneys. And then in terms of the clearance process, you apply like you would anywhere else, you interview, you get a conditional offer, hopefully, and then you start the clearance process. And like I said, we're trying to work on that, but I think it's averaging about 6 to 9 months now. I'm getting a head nod for the people on the. So yeah, so that's pretty much the process.
Okay. Is it different for the other panelists about how that process might work for yours? Or do you have any other suggestions about somebody who might be interested in coming in laterally or even recent graduate?
I guess for us, NGA just requires 3 years of experience. So what happens is that first 3 years after law school, you don't qualify for the honors program unless you've been a clerk. And then after 3 years, then you can come in laterally because we have, you may have heard the term pay band. That's actually what we work under. We don't work on the general services schedule, the GS or the GG, the intelligence community schedule. And so we hire band 3s, which are equivalent of GS 12s and GS 13 attorneys with about 3 years experience. So normally we've been averaging minimum of about 5 or 6 years experience, but that's just because we'll have one opening and get 185 resumes. So we're very competitive to get in. For the clearance process, it has gotten better. It had been up to 12 and 18 months. And like Ashley's saying, I think we're down to about 6 to 9 months. But it's one of those decisions. Don't decide tomorrow that you want to go work for one of the IC members, because it's not going to happen. Because until you get a conditional offer, they won't even start the clearance process because it's expensive and it's time consuming. So make sure you factor that into your timelines when you're looking to apply for a job within any intelligence community.
For some of our LLMs that I know that are listening online and also with us today, I know some agencies in the government actually give credit and pay for your LLM because of how robust our procurement program is. Are you aware in particular if your agencies do that off the top of your head? If not, you can file a supplemental brief. You don't, okay.
I mean, I'll take a short crack at this. I mean, I think what happens, at least for, what my experience was and what I know other folks that I work with, you get credit for your experience based on either what, records substantiate, or if you're not happy with what it is that you've received in advance, you can say, but I've got all of this experience. So that experience can qualify, sure.
Anything I didn't think of that either Brian or Deegan wants to add to this one line of questions before I move on?
I would just add, as to the security clearance process, we get it. It takes a while, but Ashley's point is really important. It takes a long time, and this is something all of the agencies recognize, and we're all working really hard to shrink and reduce the timeline, because I think we all have stories of some great candidates who 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 months later, couldn't keep waiting, and so moved on to other opportunities. And that's definitely not what we want. You know, we want those folks in our community. So we're working hard to address it, but yeah, 5 months, 6 months, 7 months, that's about the average.
Right, so we are joined also in person and online by some of the students in our newest degree program at GW Law, which is our Master of Studies in Law in Government Procurement or Government Procurement and Cybersecurity, who are non-attorney acquisition professionals who also have questions about opportunities in the agencies. So I'm going to start with, maybe you can kind of say your name and introduce yourself and your agency and talk about how our MSL students or even not our alumni, but acquisition professionals can obtain work in your agency. So I'm gonna pass around like Oprah right now.
Hi, my name's Kelly Pickering. I'm the Procurement Executive and Director, Office of Contract Services at National Geospatial-Intelligence Agency. So I work closely with Ken Sachs. I'm joined here by my Deputy D Merchant. But it's interesting, as I was sitting here, I've actually worked at every one of these agencies because I've been around the intelligence community quite a bit for the last 25 years. They're all great places to work. And so I would just really encourage anybody here who's interested in any of these agencies to apply because it's very rewarding to work in the intelligence community. So we have different opportunities. If you're coming to us, if you're in a master's in program and getting a certificate or a degree in procurement, you can apply to us. Usually a lot of those people already have some contracting experience. And so we would be factoring that in when we do the hiring. As Ken suggested, we're on a banded scale, not GS. So we actually look at the years of experience that the individual has and determine should they come in as a band 3, band 4. We have openings all the time at the band 3 and band 4 level for new hires. We also, for people who are just getting out of school, we actually bring, much like these folks here, we have a summer internship program. I'm going to have to defer to Dee though, when is our next opening? Because I know we're evaluating things right now. Do you know when the next time that's going to open up?
I think because of the clearance process.
So it would be the summer that we're
2024?
evaluating people for 2023 right now.
So we will
So-
be following up with you for information for
Yeah.
students about summer 2024.
So with that, I would just like to add, we've brought in people. Right now, we have somebody who is a law school graduate. He came to us as a summer intern. He enjoyed it. And then while he was finishing up, well, I can't remember if this guy did or not. We've had some people that came to work part-time while they were finishing up school. The attorney didn't, but we've had people that were working on master's degrees to do that. And then once they graduated, they joined us full-time. So when they come in as interns, it's as a band 2. And then they go through a training program and they get promoted to band 3, or they go through a career, called the CAP program. I've forgotten what the career advancement program. It takes about 18 months to 2 years to do everything that you have to go through the list to get that. And then you get promoted non-competitively to band 3. Somebody who comes to us with a law degree would come higher. The individual I was referring to before that has a law degree, when he graduated from CAP, he was a band 3. So they start out a little bit higher with the law degree. So even though I know I'm talking to people who have procurement background, anybody who's in school right now, we can consider you for the internship, if you're interested in that, or a permanent position. That gives you a chance to check us out and see if you like it. And just another thing, we've hired several people who are actually attorneys to work as contracting officers as well. And that is not just our agency, it's some of the others up here, but we've got some of those. In fact, we have somebody right now who he was an attorney in private industry. He worked in our office probably for, I don't know, 6-7 years. Still interested then, In law, he went on rotation. He's over working in Ken's office right now on a rotational assignment, and, you know, he'll get to have an opportunity to decide, does he want to stick with it, or does he want to come back to contracts after he does that? So there's a huge amount of opportunity. I'll ask, did I miss anything, Dee?
Pass it on for NRO.
Hi, my name is Rosanna Rogers, and I am a contracting officer at the NRO, National Reconnaissance Office. I am not an attorney, although I have quite a bit of experience having worked in legal firms, but not as in an attorney capacity. So our agency, like Brian said, is a little bit different. And one of the things that I wanted to just update you on the internships. So the NRO does offer internships, however, not in the general counsel's office. And the Office of Contracts does offer internships. Like Kelly was saying, we are full for the upcoming summer, but we are taking applications for the summer of 2024. Now, one of the other things that the NRO does, we understand the pain of having to go through USA Gov, as you were saying, you know, the black hole. So we have our own website, and we made it very easy for future NRO candidates or employees. I'm just going to say, you guys want to come over. And so our website is www.nro.gov/careers. And I happen to have here something that's even easier, little, you probably can't see it, but there's a little QR code. You just put your cell phone on that, takes you straight to the website, gives you all the information you need, and it takes you for contracts, all the information you need. Plus, there's a contact. We have a senior contracting officer who's in charge of our recruiting. That's a new thing that we're doing now, and she understands the pains of coming on board, and understands the difficulties of you know, entering the IC community. One of the other things that I wanted to point out that for folks that are interested to join the intelligence community, I know it's the case with the CIA, but at the NRO, say that you come on board to the Office of Contracts, there's these opportunities called joint duty assignment. So if at any point you decide, I think I want to go try, you know, work a couple years for the NGA, you would be allowed to go work at the NGA. And a lot of times folks don't come back. But I will say a lot of times folks come to our office and they're like, oh, I really like it here. And so they don't come back, but we do have those opportunities. And that's something that's very unique, I think, to the IC world that we share, and we have that joint duty assignments. And so because we understand once you have that clearance, that top secret SCI clearance, you can go in between agencies. And that's something that you don't necessarily have in DOD. So if you're working for the Air Force, you can't not always, at least not in contracts, go do 2 years with the Army. But then again, why would you want to go to the Army? I'm sorry, I'm an Air Force brat, born and raised, and I was a little bit anyway. But I have a lot of these. I have a ton of stuff here from our recruiting office. Is yours
www.nro.gov/careers.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. All right, so we have a few minutes before we open this up so we can give you guys that are in person some access to our wonderful panel. Does anybody from either online or the audience have questions? And I know one of the questions that we did have come in earlier was about our degree programs. So if you have questions about that, you can just email the email that sent you the reminder for today, and we'll get in touch with you with information about our master's programs and of course our JD concentration. But do we have any questions in our few remaining minutes? I have Sophie behind you.
Hi, do any of you count a JD concentration in government?
think there was going to need to be a supplemental brief also filed with this one.
So.
Oh, sorry.
So at the end of the row, we count years of experience and or education. So if you say you're still in law school or just right out of law school, your education counts towards that experience. So it's not necessarily just work experience. So your education does matter. For contracts.
And I was going to say the same thing in contracting. If you were to come and work in contracting, that degree will let you come in at a higher level as if you're, it gives you credit for a few years of experience. So you come in at a higher level to start in contracting.
But I think on the OGC side, it's going to be years as a practicing attorney. I can double check with our recruiting office, but it's my, the way our pay is structured, it is as a licensed practicing attorney, not part of your education.
But that being said, the concentration will make you a much more attractive applicant.
So that might be like a two-part question, right? Am I eligible to be employed by any of the agencies based only having graduated or having graduated and then earned my LLM? The answer for the NRO is yes, you're eligible. I think it's going to be case specific as to what kind of pay band or GS or GG level that you would come in at.
And Sophie, for us and NGA, the answer is no. It doesn't, you have to have 3 years of post bar admission experience before you're qualified for a lateral. That's not the case for the honors program. For the honors program, it will make a big I suspect that it would make a big difference. Now when we do our honors attorneys like the CIA, we do rotation for the 3 years that you're an honors attorney. So you will rotate through all of the different divisions. So you would not just be procurement, you would go through our civil law or operation and international law division. You go through the different divisions as well. That's the difference between an honors attorney, which we do rotations. Our lateral attorneys get hired for the position and work experience that they've got. And Sophie and I were classmates, so that's why. Well.
So right in front of Sophie, you had a question?
A little bit, sort of something that Ken brought up is the fact that once a government contracts attorney, always a government contracts attorney, or so it seems. Could you speak a little bit to the, if I get into this world and I discover that it's not where my passion lies, how easy it is to be able to transition?
Vary.
Anybody.
It's about your skills. So the one thing I will tell you, as far as just broader, because I know everybody here is doing government contracts right now, so it's like the reverse question, and no one's tried to get out yet, I'm assuming, from government contracts. But
I had a detour.
okay, so I will come back to that, but I will say it's about your skills. So the one thing I will say about government contracts is it's such an in-demand practice area that when people see it on your resume, they do tend to focus on it because there's just a lot of jobs. There's a ton. And so I think it's a target. But the other thing I will say about that is it's about skills. So if you're doing bid protests, that's litigation. If you're doing mergers and acquisitions in government procurement, that's M&A, that's transactional. If you're doing compliance, it's compliance. And I see students that wind up broadening into, somebody might start in government contracts, but they're also doing healthcare and they want to morphing into healthcare. So you've just got to figure out what those skills are. And it's your job when you apply to new employers to be able to translate that for them so that they don't just see government contracts. They see, oh, I did, XYZ on litigation, and that's what you need to focus on. But I will tell you, once you come to government contracts, except for Ashley here, you never want to leave. All right, Ashley.
I tried defecting, but I did come back. So no, so like I was saying, I went to the Department of Commerce and into the contract law division sort of unknowingly. And I was there for 4 years and I really enjoyed my time. And for personal reasons, I didn't need to move back to Chicago. But if I'm being completely candid, I also wasn't entirely sure that I was sold on government contracts. And to Dean Tillman's point, government contracts I am going to give it the hard sell for a second. It is a really interesting practice area because I think it's one of the few practice areas that cross-sects with so many different areas. Like she was saying, there's compliance, there's M&A work, there's litigation. And I don't know that there's another practice area out there that's like that. But I did find that it was a little bit hard to get a non-government contract job out of commerce. But that being said, I was also moving to Chicago where people don't really understand government contract practice as well. But I was able to do it, and I went to a law firm and transitioned quite a bit to commercial litigation practice. But what I learned there is I'd already started to develop an expertise in government contracts, and sort of against my own will, it is fascinating. I was at a cocktail party once with my husband,
This is the hard stuff.
and no, and I did a lot of suspension and debarment work at the Department of Commerce, and this poor woman, I started getting into a conversation with her about suspension and debarment. I don't know how it started, but I started explaining to her how important it was, and integrity in the government procurement system, and your tax dollars how to work. And my husband afterwards was like, what's that? Maybe this really is what you should be doing. And so it's just a really interesting practice area. There are so many different things that you can do with it. And so I wouldn't go into it with trepidation, because to Dean Tillman's point and to my learned experience, you can certainly transition if you want to. I think you'll start to find that you've developed a specialization, and that specialization has a lot of value, particularly as you start to grow your career and you want advancement opportunities and that sort of thing. But don't feel like if you start down that path, there's never a way to reset yourself. I've been in enough interviews where people are like, so you don't have a very traditional career path. And it's all about how you sell yourself. If you have a thoughtful explanation about how you've taken every career step that you have, people will understand. But it's all about being thoughtful about how you're doing it.
All right. Oh, we'll do one more question in the back, and then it's time to eat and talk.
My question is more about lateral moving. So I'm a contracting officer right now. So what, I'm a new attorney, but I haven't been doing specifically legal work yet. I'm still working out on the program side. What value does coming from the contract side bring, if you're trying to be a lateral move versus someone who's coming from a firm or something lateral?
So you're saying, sorry, lateral as into an attorney role though?
Yeah, like working in government contracts for 5 to 7 years, but trying now to move into an OGC office or something like that, but having the contracting officer experience. That's something you guys look at.
I will speak for myself and for my chief's approval. I'm getting the head nod again. No, that's certainly something we look at. One of the agency's big pushes right now is to diversity of experience, diversity of everything. And so we have attorneys that are from law firms, we have attorneys that are from government, from clerkships, but certainly the experience that you would bring, having seen the other side, the contracting officer's side, would be invaluable. I think I do review resumes, and if I were reviewing your resume, I would have that opinion, and I would have that comment. Because you're going to understand the nuts and bolts of government contracting in a way that I frankly just don't, because that's not been my education. That's not been my professional experience. So on behalf of the CIA, we would find it very valuable.
At NGA, we would say it's not a lateral. You'd be hired as an honors attorney, as long as you, again, right out of law school. But again, that experience as a CO would be looked upon very favorably, I think, in an interview panel, but it wouldn't be considered a lateral move. It's like I said, NGA requires 3 years of post-law school, bar admission experience before you can be considered a lateral. But in your case, it would be an issue for our honors attorneys.
And actually, just to clarify that point, yeah, if you don't have experience as a lawyer, you would be coming in as an honors attorney as well. It wouldn't be a lateral hire, but still be welcome in the honors program.
Well, with that, we'll thank everyone who joined us online and say good night to you. And for everyone that's staying here, there's wonderful food for you to have, and I hope you get a chance to meet our wonderful panel. So thank you to our panel. Thank you to their colleagues who joined us in the front row. We really appreciate your time. All right. Thanks, everyone.